She competed with Rome's most famous prostitute to see who could sleep with more men in 24 hours. She won 25 men, one night. And she was the Empress of Rome. While her husband, the Emperor, was out of town, Valeria Messalina threw parties in the imperial palace where she forced aristocratic women to perform sexual acts with multiple partners. She ran a brothel out of her own bedroom. She disguised herself in a blonde wig and worked in the cheapest brothels of Rome until sunrise. And when none of that was enough, she married another man in a public ceremony while still being married to the emperor. This is the story of Messalina, the woman who turned the most powerful palace in the world into her personal playground, and how her obsession with power and pleasure destroyed her at age 26. This isn't just another story about a scandalous royal. This is about a teenage girl who married a disabled man 30 years older than her, became Empress of the most powerful empire on earth, and decided that if she was going to be trapped in that role, she would rewrite every single rule, and Rome would never forget her. The year was 38 AD. Valeria Messalina was somewhere between 15 and 18 years old when she married Tiberius Claudius Nero Germanicus. Everyone called him Claudius. He was 47 years old, divorced twice, father of 2, and considered a complete embarrassment to his family. Messalina came from one of the most prestigious bloodlines in Rome. She was the great-grandniece of Emperor Augustus himself, descended from his sister Octavia. She was a second cousin to the current Emperor Caligula. She was a first cousin to the future Emperor Nero. Her family tree was packed with emperors and empresses. She had royal blood running through her veins, and they married her off to Claudius. Claudius was everything Roman society despised. He had visible physical disabilities. He stuttered. He drooled. He had a limp. His own mother called him a monster. His great-uncle Augustus wouldn't let him sit with the family in public because he was an embarrassment. His uncle Tiberius banned him from holding any political office. For 47 years, Claudius had been treated like garbage by his own family, while watching his siblings receive honors, power, and glory. So, when young Messalina married him, nobody expected anything great. This was supposed to be a quiet, unremarkable marriage. Claudius would stay in the shadows. Messalina would have children and live a comfortable but boring aristocratic life. Nobody could have predicted what happened next. Within 3 years, Claudius became Emperor of Rome. In 41 AD, Emperor Caligula was assassinated by his own guards. The entire imperial family was in chaos. Nobody knew who would take power. The Senate argued, the military threatened, and Claudius, that embarrassing uncle nobody respected, hid in the army camps and somehow convinced everyone to make him emperor. At barely 20 years old, Messalina went from being the wife of a nobody to being Empress of Rome. She was one of the most powerful women in the world. And just weeks after Claudius became emperor, Messalina gave birth to their son, Britannicus. She made history as the first woman to give birth to a Roman emperor's son while he was already ruling. She had power, she had status, she had access to everything, and she was going to use all of it. The problem with understanding Messalina is that almost everything we know about her was written by men who hated her. Roman historians Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Elder, Juvenal, and Cassius Dio all wrote about Messalina decades and even centuries after her death, and they all had one goal: to make her look like a monster. But even when you filter out the exaggerations and propaganda, what remains is still shocking. According to multiple sources, Messalina didn't just have affairs, She turned sex into a weapon. She used it to destroy her enemies, control her husband, and dominate the political landscape of Rome. Tacitus, writing about 50 years after her death, describes Messalina as ruthless, calculating, and sexually insatiable. He claims she manipulated Emperor Claudius constantly, whispering lies in his ear, spreading rumors, making up fake prophecies, and turning him against anyone she wanted destroyed. One of her first major victims was a man named Valerius Asiaticus. He owned a beautiful estate called the Gardens of Lucullus. Messalina wanted those gardens for herself. So she spread rumors that Asiaticus was having an affair with a noblewoman named Poppaea Sabina. The scandal gave Claudius an excuse to arrest both of them. Asiaticus was executed. Poppaea was imprisoned and later driven to suicide by Messalina's agents. And Messalina got the gardens. This became her pattern. She saw something she wanted. She fabricated a scandal. She got Claudius to sign the execution orders, and she took what she wanted: land, money, political positions, men. But the sexual rumors are what really made her infamous. Roman writers claimed that Messalina ran a brothel inside the imperial palace itself. According to historian Cassius Dio, writing almost 200 years after her death, Messalina would invite men into her private chambers and charge them money for sex. And it gets worse. She allegedly forced other aristocratic women to participate, turning noble women into prostitutes against their will. Some of these stories might be exaggerated. Roman historians loved to demonize powerful women by accusing them of sexual deviance. But even if half of these stories are propaganda, the other half is still outrageous. Pliny the Elder, who was actually alive during Claudius's reign and served as a military officer in Germany during that time, wrote about Messalina in his encyclopedia called Natural History. In a section about animal mating habits, he mentions that humans are the only species that never get sexually satisfied. And to prove his point, he tells the story of Empress Messalina competing with a famous prostitute to see who could have sex with more men. The competition lasted 24 hours, night and day. When it was over, Messalina had been with 25 men. She won. Now, this story might be exaggerated or even completely made up. But the fact that a respected scholar like Pliny included it in his encyclopedia shows how widely these rumors spread. People believed that the Empress of Rome was capable of this, and that belief alone tells you how she was perceived. A generation after Pliny, a poet named Juvenal wrote a collection of satirical poems called Satires. In his section about why he hates women, he dedicates several verses to Messalina. And his version of the story is even more extreme. According to Juvenal, Messalina would wait until Claudius fell asleep at night. Then she would put on a blonde wig, disguise herself as a common prostitute, and sneak out of the palace. She would go to the cheapest, dirtiest brothels in Rome and work there until sunrise. She would have sex with client after client, one after another, for hours. And even when the brothel closed at dawn and she was physically exhausted, Juvenal claims she was still not satisfied. She would return to the palace before Claudius woke up, and nobody would know where she had been. Again, this might be complete fiction. Juvenal was a satirist who hated women in general. His whole purpose was to exaggerate and mock. But these stories became part of Messalina's legend. They've been repeated for 2,000 years. They became the way history remembers her. Whether or not she actually did these things, the rumors destroyed her reputation, and they gave her enemies the ammunition they needed to justify her eventual execution. But Messalina wasn't just obsessed with sex. She was obsessed with power, and she was willing to kill anyone who threatened her position. Tacitus lists multiple people that Messalina had executed or exiled during her years as empress. She targeted members of the imperial family who might challenge her children's claim to the throne. She went after senators who opposed her influence over Claudius. She destroyed women who were more beautiful than her, or who caught the attention of men she wanted. One particularly disturbing story involves a dancer named Mnestor. He was famous throughout Rome for his performances. Messalina became obsessed with him and demanded that he sleep with her. Mnestor refused. Again and again, he rejected her advances. So Messalina went to her husband and complained that Mnestor was being disobedient and disrespectful to her. Claudius, completely clueless about what was really going on, ordered Mnestor to obey whatever the empress commanded. Mnestor had no choice. He was forced into a sexual relationship with Messalina under imperial orders. This is the kind of power Messalina wielded. She could force anyone into her bed. She could have anyone killed. She controlled the emperor. She controlled the courts. She controlled the military. And for almost 10 years, nobody could stop her. But Messalina made one fatal mistake. She fell in love. His name was Gaius Silius. He was a Roman senator, young, handsome, ambitious, and everything Claudius was not. Messalina started an affair with him. This wasn't unusual for her. She had affairs constantly, but this time was different. Messalina became obsessed with Silius. She showered him with gifts. She gave him family heirlooms. She bought him houses. She transferred imperial property into his name. Their affair became public knowledge. Everyone in Rome knew about it. And Silius divorced his wife to be with Messalina. But Messalina couldn't divorce Claudius. She was the empress. Her children were heirs to the throne. Divorcing the emperor would mean losing everything. So she did something absolutely insane. In 48 AD, while Emperor Claudius was out of town in the port city of Ostia, Messalina and Gaius Silius held a public wedding ceremony. Let me repeat that. The Empress of Rome, still legally married to the emperor, put on a yellow bridal veil, walked through the streets of Rome in broad daylight, went to Silius's house, exchanged wedding vows with him, and then threw a massive party to celebrate. Historians still debate what this actually was. Was it a real wedding? Was it some kind of religious ritual? Was it a political coup attempt? Was Messalina trying to overthrow Claudius and install Silius as the new emperor? Nobody knows for sure, but what happened next is very clear. News of the wedding reached Claudius within hours. His advisors sent his two favorite mistresses to tell him that Messalina had publicly divorced him by marrying another man. Claudius panicked. He thought Messalina and Silius were trying to overthrow him and seize the throne. He ordered the Praetorian Guard to arrest everyone involved. Silius was brought before Claudius at the army camps. He was executed on the spot for treason. All of his allies were killed immediately. Messalina was escorted to the gardens of Lucullus, those same gardens she had stolen years earlier by having their previous owner executed. Now she was trapped there, waiting to learn her fate. Claudius was devastated. Despite everything, he still loved her. She was his wife of 10 years. She was the mother of his children. He decided to give her a trial the next day and hear her side of the story. But Claudius's advisors were terrified. They knew Messalina was a master manipulator. They feared she would seduce Claudius again, convince him to forgive her, and then have all of them executed for disloyalty. They couldn't let that happen. So they took matters into their own hands. They sent soldiers to the gardens of Lucullus with orders to execute Messalina immediately. They lied and told the soldiers that the emperor had given the order. When the soldiers arrived, Messalina was with her mother, according to Tacitus. Even at the very end, Messalina was still trying to find a way out. She was still scheming. She was still looking for an escape route. The soldiers gave her the option to commit suicide, which was considered more honorable than execution. But Messalina couldn't do it. She held the knife to her throat, but couldn't bring herself to push it in. Tacitus sneers that she was so lacking in virtue, so corrupt, that she couldn't even take her own life properly. So one of the soldiers did it for her. He ran her through with his sword. Messalina died at approximately 26 years old. In the gardens she had murdered someone to own. When messengers brought news of Messalina's death to Emperor Claudius, he was at dinner. According to Tacitus, Claudius showed no emotion, no anger, no sadness, no joy, no grief. He just called for another cup of wine and continued eating as if nothing had happened. In the days and weeks that followed, Claudius never mentioned Messalina's name. He never spoke about what happened. It was as if she had never existed. The Roman Senate issued a damnatio memoriae against her. This was an official order to erase someone from history. Her name was chiseled off monuments. Her statues were destroyed. Her image was removed from coins. Everything associated with Messalina was supposed to disappear, but it didn't work, because the rumors were too good, the stories were too scandalous, the legend was too powerful. Here's what we actually know for sure. Messalina was the third wife of Emperor Claudius. She married him when she was a teenager and he was in his late 40s. She gave him 2 children, Octavia and Britannicus. She was involved in political intrigues and used her influence over Claudius to have several people executed. She had an affair with Senator Gaius Silius. She held some kind of wedding ceremony with him while Claudius was away. She was executed for treason in 48 AD. Everything else, all the sexual rumors, all the stories about brothels and competitions and disguises, comes from sources written decades or centuries after her death by men who wanted to destroy her reputation. But even if we assume half of those stories are lies, the other half is still shocking. Messalina clearly had affairs. She clearly manipulated Claudius. She clearly used sex as a tool for political power. And she clearly had no problem killing anyone who stood in her way. The question is why? Why would a young woman, an empress with everything, risk it all for something as reckless as a public wedding to another man? Some historians think she was genuinely in love with Silius and made an impulsive, emotional decision. Others think it was a calculated coup attempt and she was trying to overthrow Claudius and seize power. Still others think she was addicted to scandal and danger and simply couldn't stop herself from pushing boundaries. The truth is probably a mix of all three. Messalina's story is tragic in a way that people don't usually talk about. She was married off as a teenager to a man she didn't choose. She became empress by accident. She lived in a world where women had almost no legal rights and were considered perpetual minors under the law. She couldn't own property. She couldn't vote. She couldn't hold office. Her entire existence was controlled by men. So she found the one weapon women were allowed to have: sexuality. And she weaponized it with ruthless efficiency. She used it to manipulate, to control, to destroy, to survive. But Roman historians couldn't let her be remembered as a political operator. They couldn't let her be remembered as clever, calculating, and powerful. because that would mean admitting that a woman had outsmarted men, that a woman had controlled the emperor, that a woman had dominated Rome's politics for almost a decade. So instead, they reduced her to a simple caricature, the nymphomaniac Empress, the woman who just loved sex too much, the imperial whore. But that's not who she was. Messalina was far more dangerous than that. She was a master manipulator who understood exactly how to use the system against itself. She knew how to play on Claudius's weaknesses. She knew how to fabricate scandals. She knew how to eliminate threats. She knew how to accumulate power in a world that told her she had none. And that's what made her truly terrifying. Not her sexuality, her intelligence, her ruthlessness, her ambition. For almost 10 years, Messalina effectively ruled Rome from behind the throne. She made senators tremble. She destroyed families. She controlled an empire. And when she finally fell, it wasn't because she loved sex too much. It was because she wanted too much power. That's the real scandal of Messalina. Not that she turned her palace into a sex cult, but that she almost got away with turning her husband into a puppet and herself into the true ruler of Rome. And Rome has never forgiven her for it.